Did Joe Biden just solve the national debt crisis? That's what I'll be talking about in today's video. Hey folks, I'm best-selling author David McKnight. With the Senate passing the Inflation Reduction Act, virtually ensuring that it will soon be signed into law, there's been a lot of excitement in some circles about how this legislation is the first big move towards taming our country's ever-burgeoning national debt. You almost get the sensation that we're well on our way to fixing a debt problem that has heretofore been intractable. To wit, I just received an email from Maya McGinnis, the president of the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Maya, and she's doing a yeoman's work on getting the word out on the dangers of the national debt. But take a listen to the almost festive tone of her most recent email. Quote, the Inflation Reduction Act will be the largest deficit reduction law in over a decade, assuming it is ultimately signed into law. This legislation represents an important first step towards fixing our debt and helping the Federal Reserve fight inflation. The Inflation Reduction Act will reduce near and long-term deficits while still enacting a number of policies related to energy, climate, healthcare, and the tax code. To those concerned with the nation's fiscal situation, it is a major victory. It is a model for how we can get multiple things done responsibly without punting on the pay-force. It has been so long since we had a significant deficit reduction package that 60% of our federal lawmakers have never experienced one. This package is important not only for the savings it generates, but for the example it sets that when something is worth doing, it is worth paying for, and that deficit reduction should not just be an empty talking point, but an actual commitment, close quote. So, like I said, you almost get the feeling that success is within reach, that this package has given the deficit hawks so much momentum that the debt issue has all but been solved. To get a sense for whether we're actually making any real progress on the national debt, let's use the numbers that are posted on the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget's website. Here's what they had to say about how much savings this bill actually generates. Quote, the $485 billion of new costs would be offset with $790 billion of additional revenue and savings over a decade. This includes roughly $313 billion from imposing a 15% minimum tax on corporate book income, $322 billion for various reforms to reduce prescription drug costs, $204 billion from reducing the tax gap through stronger internal revenue service, $204 billion from reducing the tax gap through stronger internal revenue service enforcement, $13 billion from closing the carried interest loophole, and $18 billion from fees on methane emissions, Superfund cleanup sites, and a permanent extension of the higher tax rate for the Black Lung Disability Trust Fund, close quote. So let me see if I can summarize here. This act will save a whopping $305 billion over the next 9 years. That's an average of $33.8 billion per year. Let me put that into perspective for you. According to Statista.com, the national debt is projected to be over $30.6 trillion by the end of 2022 and $43.3 billion by the end of 2031. That means we'll be adding an additional $12.7 trillion of debt over the next 9 years alone. So let's be clear. This bill does nothing to reduce the current debt. It only slows the growth of the debt over the next 9 years by a measly 2.6%. That's not 2.6% per year. That's 2.6% over the entire 9-year period. In other words, I wouldn't start handing out cigars just yet. Does this bill actually reduce the national debt? No, it doesn't. It simply slows the growth of the debt ever so slightly in a statistically insignificant way. It's sort of like throwing a paper airplane at a freight train and hoping that it will somehow slow it down. Okay, folks, it's time for the Power Zero question of the day. What do you think about the Inflation Reduction Act? Feel free to put your answers in the comment section below. So how do we fix the national debt? A serious proposal would likely do two things. First, it would fundamentally reform the biggest drivers of that debt, namely Social Security and Medicare. For Social Security, this would likely involve moving the Social Security age back to age 70 or 72 while adding in some sort of means testing. And for Medicare, it would likely involve pushing back the start date for Medicare while at the same time rationing the care, sort of like we see from our friends in Europe. Keep in mind, I'm not advocating these changes. I'm simply stating what would likely have to happen if we truly wanted to slow the rate of growth on the national debt. The second thing it would likely involve is a dramatic increase in revenue starting immediately. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm as big a fan of tax cuts as there is. Nobody likes paying any more taxes than they absolutely have to, but I'm also a realist, and I know that the math problem here is insurmountable without massive new infusions of cash. A few years ago, Maya McGinnis conducted a study where she calculated how high taxes would have to go to simply prevent the national debt from growing more than $1 trillion per year. She concluded that the federal government would have to tax every single dollar earned above $50,000 at 40%. In other words, the IRS would have to dramatically expand the tax base so that virtually every American falls under its scope. It's not enough to simply tax the rich. So, increase revenue, reduce spending, or some combination of the two. So while some savings are better than none, the Inflation Reduction Act is not a serious attempt to fix the national debt, and we should not be celebrating it as such. It's more like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Our ship of state is still going to founder, but the speed with which it's going to founder has slowed by 2.6% over the next 9 years. What does this mean for those of you who are intent on getting to the 0% tax bracket in retirement? It means that your justification for doing so is just as strong as ever. The threat posed by the national debt is as large and ominous as it has ever been. Tax rates will still have to rise dramatically to keep our country solvent, and yes, the best way to protect your hard-earned retirement savings from that threat is still to get to the 0% tax bracket in retirement. Why is the 0% tax bracket so important? Because if tax rates double, 2 times 0 is still 0. If you need some help creating a retirement plan that shields you from the effects of the burgeoning national debt, then head on over to davidmcknight.com and opt in for a complimentary strategy session. I'm happy to give you a hand. Don't forget to click like, subscribe, and the bell so you never miss a video, and feel free to make comments or ask questions in the comment section below. This is David McKnight. I look forward to seeing you on the next video.